For the past 25 years, Test Track has been the premier e-ticket attraction at Disney World's Epcot theme park. But it hasn't always been a smooth ride. Construction delays, major media production failures, and one $17 billion bailout later, I still can't believe they made it happen. This is the history of Test Track. Before we get to the Test Track that we all know and love today, we must first take a ride from the sim track through the production line all the way back to a world of motion.
The 21st century begins October 1, 1982. Epcot Center, Walt Disney World.
During the planning stages of the Walt Disney Company's next massive Florida project, it was decided that the idea of a permanent World's Fair would be the main focus. The soon-to-be-named Epcot Center, although a detour from Walt's original vision of an experimental prototype community of tomorrow, would still hold true to the idea of an ever-changing showcase of the latest technology and education. The back of the park, World Showcase, and the front, Future World. This permanent World's Fair concept would not only provide a space for showcasing the latest tech in places like the Communicore Pavilion, but also allow for companies to invest in their own pavilions in the park. After seeing the success that other companies like General Electric and Ford had at the 1964 World's Fair, with their sponsored attractions that were created by WED Enterprises, later renamed to Walt Disney Imagineering, General Motors wanted a piece of the action and became the first sponsor to sign on as part of Epcot Center. What was then known internally as the Transportation Pavilion, this pavilion was to be a similar concept to Ford's Magic Skyway attraction at the aforementioned 1964 World's Fair, a ride that took guests that were sat inside a Ford model car back in time to the prehistoric era and all the way forward to the future. Once the World's Fair concluded in 1965, the Magic Skyway was physically scrapped. But the concept itself was divided into multiple different future rides at Disney parks. The ride system was later used in Tomorrowland's People Mover, which debuted just 2 years later at Disneyland. This scene from the prehistoric era was used on Disneyland's Railroad, where it still sits today. General Electric's Carousel of Progress made its way to Disneyland as well. And of course, the Transportation Pavilion. General Motors saw this as a great idea for a ride, but the question had to be asked, how would this help them sell cars? Well, the idea was to shift the story from the history of planet Earth to the history of transportation and how it progressed through the centuries.
Another kind of journey will take you into the world of motion, where a whimsical series of audio animatronic scenes will show that the story of transportation is indeed a moving experience.
World of Motion began construction along with the rest of the park in 1979. With just 3 years to complete a park that more than doubled the size of Magic Kingdom, Epcot Center opened on October 1st, 1982. World of Motion was among the first Future World pavilions to open at the park alongside the Land Pavilion, Universe of Energy, Spaceship Earth, Communicore East, Communicore West, and the Imagination Pavilion. Although the Journey into Imagination ride itself would not open until March of the following year. World of Motion took guests inside of tiered Omnimover vehicles similar to the ones that you could still find on Imagination today, through an open-air entrance of the ride, up a spiral ramp, and into the second floor of the show building. One aspect of World of Motion that made the ride very different from its Magical Skyway predecessor is its comedic elements. Almost every scene used physical comedy in some way, shape, or form. Depictions of the invention of the wheel, where various shapes are presented before landing on the round shape. Or a very impatient Mona Lisa as Leonardo da Vinci takes a painting break to work on his flying machine. Or what's probably the most iconic scene from the ride, the world's first traffic jam. With anywhere from 139 to 188 audio animatronics, it is hard to find an official number online, but regardless of what that actual number is, the World of Motion still holds the record for the most animatronics in a single theme park attraction, more than doubling almost every runner-up. To accompany this wacky story, a soundtrack was needed. In the 50s and 60s, if you were looking to create a signature tune for a Disney attraction, there was really only one answer. The Sherman Brothers get much deserved praise for creating iconic songs like It's a Small World, Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow from the Carousel of Progress, and the Tiki Room soundtrack, but another group of Disney music legends were assigned the task for World of Motion's soundtrack. The team of composer Buddy Baker and lyricist Ex Atencio, who you might recognize from his work on the Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion soundtracks, came together to create It's Fun to Be Free, a lighthearted tune that, much like It's a Small World, changed in tone and genre as the ride vehicles moved from room to room. The ride ended with a look into the future of transportation in a scene depicting a 3D model of a city referred to as Center Core, a translucent, glowing city modeled after Walt's original vision for Epcot. Once exiting the ride, guests entered the Trans Center, a large showroom that was full of exhibits and shows about transportation and, of course, some of the latest vehicles from General Motors' fleet. Among the exhibits was an audio animatronic show called Bird and the Robot. Basically, a bird like one you would find in the Tiki Room explaining how General Motors now uses robotic arms in their assembly line, which, to be fair, was advanced technology for 1982. This is honestly one of my favorite pieces of ride media that exists out there, and not for the reason you would expect. This is a promotional VHS from 1989 that was made specifically for employees of General Motors and its subsidiaries like Chevrolet and Buick. It's about 15 minutes of Disney World promotion, followed by 7 minutes of self-praise from the CEO of General Motors himself, Mr. Robert Stempel. This has to have some of the most bone-dry delivery I've heard in my entire life. But I've got to give this guy some credit. One of the only other executives featured in these types of Disney videos at the time was the oh-so-charismatic Michael Eisner, so he had a lot to live up to. This promotional VHS also includes some of the most lackluster reviews from any theme park guests you could possibly imagine. You just know there was some 19-year-old cast member who was in charge of pulling dads away from their families on vacation to say something positive about what they just rode, and I guess this is the best they got.
I thought it was great. It was really entertaining. I liked all the caricatures and showed you the history of the vehicles. And it was really good, and the kids liked it too.
Overall, it seemed this was the general feeling towards the ride. A fun look at the history of transportation. The problem was, it was kind of a rinse and repeat of the rest of the park. Spaceship Earth was a slow-moving dark ride that took you through the history and future of communication. Universe of Energy was a slow-moving dark ride that took you through the history and future of energy. Horizons was a slow-moving dark ride that took you through the history and future of technology. If guests enter the park and ride each attraction as they pass it, World of Motion would have been number 4 of basically the same exact ride style and storytelling that they just saw 3 times in a row. With the exception of its comedy elements, World of Motion was very much the same formula that the other Future World rides had at the time. So much so that when it came time for General Motors to renew their contract 10 years later, some different ideas were thrown around. After General Motors chose to extend their contract for a few more years, World of Motion ended its 13-year run at Epcot on January 2nd, 1996. Shortly before its closing date, Disney announced what was to become of the Transportation Pavilion.
Opening soon at Epcot, Test Track, a behind-the-scenes look at the never-before-seen world of automobile design and testing. Test Track allows Disney guests to see firsthand the safety and engineering of today's automobiles. The illusion of high speed is produced by the suspension system, how far you are from the ground, straightaways, banking curves, and other factors characteristic of high-speed travel.
Announced in November of 1995, Test Track would take guests on a high-speed slot car-style thrill ride. We would not only see General Motors remain as the sponsor for this new ride, but this would also cost them a reported $300 million. Now, I'm not an expert on these things, so I don't know if they were footing the whole bill or Disney was covering part of it, but I'd like to imagine it's like they went to dinner, the check came, and they're fighting on how to split this bill. Test Track was themed after a General Motors factory and a testing facility that the company would use to evaluate their concept cars. As we mentioned before, most Epcot rides, including World of Motion, used a very similar ride system, and this change from dark ride to thrill ride was huge for Epcot.
When automotive safety tests are performed on cars, a select group of individuals are called into service. They are the crash test dummies.
Test Track would become the park's second thrill ride, right behind Body Wars, a motion simulator attraction in the Wonders of Life Pavilion that opened in 1989. The building itself saw major changes to its layout, both inside and out. As for the interior, the track layout completely changed, as you can see from this side-by-side comparison. Almost the entire World of Motion building, even the interior walls, were gutted for this transformation. Not only that, but World of Motion was confined to the building. Test Track, as you probably know, has an outdoor portion of the track as well, which actually started its construction before World of Motion closed, since a majority of the outdoor track is backstage and out of guest view. The construction project of converting the building from World of Motion to Test Track was a long and tedious process. With an originally planned opening date of May of 1997, numerous issues occurred, causing the construction timeline to nearly double. As this new ride system was put in place, the first issue that Imagineers ran into was the tires used on the test vehicles couldn't withstand the demand of the ride track. After all, the whole point of the ride was to show the rigors of testing vehicles in the most extreme conditions. Something that standard tires could realistically withstand running through a few tests a day, but bear in mind, these cars run hundreds of laps around this course a day, totaling 140 miles per day, racking up to 50,000 miles in a year for each car. That combined with the special ride vehicle that weighs 4,800 pounds, oh my god. Not even slapping on another sponsorship from a tire company would help save these standard tires from having to be replaced multiple times a month. The solution? Commission Goodyear to create special tires for the attraction that have the extra thickness of rubber built in to anticipate the extreme wear and tear. Other reported problems in the construction process was that in order for Test Track to run at its highest hourly capacity, 29 vehicles would be needed, but the ride's computer system could only handle a maximum of 6 cars on the track at once. After frequent software crashes, the original program was scrapped, and in its place, a new system had to be built from the ground up, causing the ride's opening to be delayed another year. Test Track began their technical rehearsals, otherwise known as a soft open, in December of 1998, with the ride officially opening to the public on March 17, 1999. Although the building structure remained mostly the same, once guests caught a glimpse of the ride's entrance, they knew they were in store for a whole new adventure. Greeted by the now iconic Test Track sign, guests would enter under a massive canopy that was added to provide some shade for the outdoor extended queue. This is also where you might find the Test Track mascots, the Crash Test Dummies, who are a group of sci-fi sentient crash test dummies who were used by the company General Motors. Around the same time of Test Track's development, there were a series of PSAs running on national TV. These commercials were hosted by Larry and Vince, the Crash Test Dummies.
If you don't use this car seat, your child won't be disappointed.
He'll be crushed.
Disney did not own the rights to Larry and Vince, so theirs were named Fletch and Lumpy, and also not associated at all with the PSAs. Very different. Just a coincidence. Fletch and Lumpy, I'm sorry, I can't get over these names, used to meet in front of the ride. This only lasted a few years before retiring the characters. After meeting and greeting, guests were welcomed inside into what was to resemble a GM factory and testing facility. A massive warehouse adorned with everything from old-timey cars, new cars, smashed cars, stacks of tires, toolboxes, more test dummies, you name it. Oh, and the music. I could still hear that mid-90s industrial Mythbusters-esque beat. I wish there was an official name for this genre. Let's call it Crash Test Core. The line would tell the story of vehicle testing and safety throughout history. A big change from its predecessor, World of Motion, that told the full history of transportation, but still maintained the same edutainment feel that Disney was known for. After waiting in the queue, guests entered a pre-show briefing room where they were given a debriefing on the testing they were about to take part in. Sherry and Bill, 2 test engineers working for General Motors, brief you on the ride you're about to experience, while monitors on either side of them show a digitally animated version of the ride, kind of spoiling the attraction a bit. But that isn't what I want you to take away from this pre-show, no. It's what's behind the scenes that's actually shocking. The main character of the video, Bill McKim, is portrayed by actor John Michael Higgins, who you might recognize from his work in the Pitch Perfect movies, Yes Man, Fred Claus, Arrested Development, or even Seinfeld. Since the opening of Test Track way back in 1999, John has done a small handful of interviews discussing his time on the set filming the pre-show of Test Track, where he highlighted how difficult the filming process actually was.
They needed someone who could do a lot of dialogue in a single take, speaking a lot of complicated technical dialogue about cars and pistons and suspensions and rods and pins and shocks and struts and, all this stuff. I was living in New York at the time. I didn't even have a car. And the problem was, of course, if I made one slip, if I hesitated, like I just did there, I said, if I hesitated. If I said the word, it was a cut.
Beyond the challenge of a 7-minute continuous take, there was one more problem. After a full day of shooting this complex one-take shot, about a year later, they had him come in to overdub what he thought was just a few bits of audio.
And I said, okay, so what is it? Is it, just a line or two? And then there was sort of silence from my agents. It turned out that there was some big sound issue that was happening in the stage, and no one caught it at the time. But I had to ADR the entire 7 minutes. First of all, it was a year ago, and I didn't have it memorized at the time. I'm frantically, my eyes are going back and forth to the page below me, up to the screen, to where my lips continue to move, whether I get stuff in there or not.
Funny enough, this wasn't the only time this would happen during the filming of a Disney World ride pre-show video. Almost exactly 20 years later, the same exact issue happened during the production of a very similar pre-ride setup. The Flight of Passage video starring David Danapor is also fully overdubbed due to audio issues during the initial recording. I will say, if you pay attention to this one closely once, you will never hear it the same way again. After exiting the Test Track briefing room, you will enter the loading platform area, where you would then board the 6-seater test vehicle. A very drastic change from the ride vehicle on World of Motion. This car, like we said, had actual tires that would sit on the quote roadway you were driving on. Except that's not what would actually be driving you. While riding, if you were able to catch a glimpse of said road, you'd notice a small slit down the center. Underneath the cars, hidden by the front and back wheels, were 2 rods connecting the car to the track that was hidden underneath the roadway. As seen in these photos of the ride vehicles being transferred from Central Shops back to Epcot during refurbishment. If you look closely, you could see the coaster-type wheels that the vehicle uses to run along the hidden track. In layman's terms, it's basically a roller coaster, but they hid the track so that it looks like the car is just driving itself. Once boarding is complete and seatbelt checked, then begins the ride and your very first test.
Hello again, we're just about ready to hit the track, so please make sure your safety belts are securely fastened, as they always should be in your vehicle.
Test sequence is downloading and we're clear for dispatch.
Okay, let's move them ahead for test 1.
The first test, the accelerated hill climb, is a great storytelling point to work around the fact that the ride actually needs to make it to the second floor anyway. Although the track layout is completely different, one remaining aspect of World of Motion is that the ride itself is on the second floor of the building. Where World of Motion used an open-air spiral ramp near the entrance to reach the main ride area, Test Track simply uses a hill climb test in the center of the building. This was followed by the rough road and brake tests. If at this point guests didn't know this ride was a thrill ride, I don't know what to tell you. Even to this day, I am still feeling the whiplash from that brake test. Oof. Then it's time to turn up the heat. In what I found to be one of the most memorable moments of the ride, you enter the extreme temperature testing rooms, where first, 216 heat lamps cook riders like a rotisserie chicken for a good 8 seconds. Then a quick drive through what felt and looked like the freezer section at a Costco before moving on. Could you imagine breaking down in either of these rooms? Which would be worse, heat or... Never mind, heat would definitely be worse. After a pass through the corrosion room, it was onto the handling test, which honestly was probably one of the most thrilling parts. This winding hill climb was like a high-speed chase through a national park, with road signs, trees, guardrails, and plenty of twists and turns, before hitting a tunnel followed by a near-miss moment from a semi-truck. The first time I rode, I definitely wasn't expecting this, probably because it wasn't featured in every single Resort TV promo at the time. Unlike plenty of other surprises that Disney was far too willing to spoil for the sake of selling park hopper tickets. A fun behind-the-scenes fact that was a point of contention in my family growing up was who was driving this semi-truck. Turns out the cardboard cutout / dummy sitting in the driver's seat was actually former President Lyndon B. Johnson. Why? I have no idea. Even today, there is some speculation on why this choice was made or if it was even him in the first place. Other reports say that they saw Nixon. Why could it have not been Roger Rabbit or Mr. Toad? Come on, that would have been perfect. And for the final test, the big finale, what was actually teased in the pre-show by showing a car running headfirst into a wall, the barrier test. Disney was going to smash riders into a million pieces. This terrified me as a kid. Like, what kind of sick freak would tease something like this? But of course, at the last second, the wall would split into two and we would transition gracefully into the speed test. Unlike nearly every other Disney ride, actually I think every other Disney ride, the speed test was on an elevated track around a backstage area of Epcot. I don't know if it was the extra elevation that would prevent riders from seeing the cast member parking, or maybe that the Mexico Pavilion wasn't actually shaped like a pyramid, but I guess there wasn't really any other option. It is pretty funny to see videos of the ride breaking down in this turn section, as guests are stuck in place at a 50-degree angle trying to stop themselves from sliding into the single rider dad that's next to them in the blazing Florida sun. Test Track would not only be the first headlining thrill ride at Epcot, but also broke the speed record for any other Disney World ride, and still holds that record to this day. Part of me always hoped that for some reason our car would be the one to smash the ride's speed record by like 5 miles per hour or more. Like as if there was any chance of seeing, oh look, we actually hit 70 this time. One last banked left turn around the front side of the building before braking and heading back down to the first floor loading platform. After exiting the ride, guests were welcomed into the assembly experience. This walkthrough attraction gave guests the feeling of walking on the floor of a vast automotive assembly plant. Other than that, we got a fun little cool station thing. Although the ride was not sponsored by Coke, they did sponsor the Cool Wash, a cooling station with a Test Track ride vehicle filled with fake ice, refreshing Coke, and a perfect amount of mist to help cool yourself off on a sunny day. I did really like this spot a lot, and I'm kind of disappointed now it's just a place to pick up a Coke slushie. I don't even drink Coke. This version of Test Track, let's call it Test Track 1.0, lasted a total of 13 years. Oddly enough, this was the same amount of time that World of Motion was open. On April 15th, 2012, Test Track would close for not just a standard refurbishment, but a retheme of the whole attraction, reopening on December 6th of that very same year. Fortunately for a thrill-seeking theme park fan like myself, Test Track was still Test Track, but with a different approach. During the contract renewal, which at this point seemed to be happening about every 13 years, General Motors was hitting a rough patch financially. See, the United States financial crisis of 2008 hit not just the housing market, but nearly every other industry as well. General Motors, alongside a few other American car manufacturers, were facing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The government solution was to provide a government bailout plan, where General Motors would receive a reported $17 billion loan to keep their company running during this troubling time. Fast forward 4 years later, and it was time for a contract renewal for a theme park ride. Anyone with common sense would think, well, it was a good run, but it's something that's just not in the cards right now because clearly they were still recovering from this setback. So General Motors did not end up sponsoring the new ride, but Chevrolet did. Yes, Chevrolet, a subsidiary of General Motors. Different brand, same company. Was this a smart decision? Probably not, but it did get one of their brands in front of tons of potential customers and prevent another major car manufacturer from swooping in and taking that spot. This new version of Test Track would overall have the same concept as the previous version, except this time taking some very clear inspiration from the Disney-owned Tron movie franchise, swapping out the industrial nature of Test Track 1.0 for the sleek neon grid look for 2.0. Maintaining the same queue layout from the first version, every single prop was removed and replaced with some prototypes of cars of the future, and a video of Chevrolet team members asking children what their dream car would look like, with projection mapping showcasing different drawn concepts on a model below, perfectly setting up the pre-show that was to come.
Well, here at Test Track, the original version, you were kind of playing the role of a crash test dummy. In this new version, you're playing the role of an automotive designer. So in the pre-show area, you have a completely immersive, interactive experience where you play the role of a designer and you design your own Chevrolet concept vehicle.
Guests could customize everything from the aerodynamic shape of the car to the wheel size to color and decals on the car, most of which contribute to the 4 performance attributes: power, responsiveness, capability, and efficiency. It's here where guests can scan their ticket or magic band to save their concept vehicle, which will then be scanned at touch points at the loading station, so when riding you could see how your concept car performs against the other guests in your ride vehicle on the sim track. Oh yeah, and you're entering a sim car and driving on the sim track. Sim is short for simulator and totally unrelated to the Sims video game franchise. The concept of creating your own car was great in theory, but especially toward the end of its run, it was not operating as they intended it, if at all. The layout of the new version of the ride was identical to the original test track with 0 changes to the track. But like I mentioned, the decor as well as some story points were altered. Like OnStar, a subscription-based communications, in-vehicle security, emergency services, navigation, and remote diagnostic system. Wow, that is a mouthful. This is a General Motors product which is available in every one of their vehicles as well as their subsidiary brands. That was then taken and infused into the storyline and used for the purpose of a voice kind of talking to riders through different parts of the ride that needed some more explaining.
Connecting to OnStar.
The hill climb and brake tests were still part of the ride, and just after this you'll find your very first Easter egg. On your left-hand side you'd find a model of a very familiar looking city. This city was referenced to Center Core, an amazing city of the future that we talked about earlier from World of Motion. Now you've got to remember this because we may be seeing this again later. Next, rather than going through extreme weather tests, sim cars were scanned for optimum eco-efficiency, with a pretty cool Pepper's Ghost type effect on the mirrors adjacent to your ride vehicle. The now coined responsiveness tests took you through the Tron-like forests up to a tunnel and then narrowly missing a semi-truck, which this time was not driven by a former president, but another Easter egg. This one is nearly impossible to see while riding, but has been spotted if you happen to break down right next to the driver's side door of the truck. In this clip, you'll be able to find an arm hanging outside of the open window and a faint silhouette of a crash test dummy. Is this possibly Fletch or Lumpy? How much are they paying the cast member in the crash test dummy costume to just sit there from park open to park close? Come on, Disney, the world needs to know. After bursting through the doors in the named Power Test, eagle-eyed riders could find 3 street signs that make references to the original World of Motion. One, a sign that reads 82, which is not the speed limit, but rather the opening year of World of Motion and the rest of Epcot. The second, a sign of Center Core, the city of the future. And third, a sign that reads FNTBFRE, with the original World of Motion logo just below it. If you haven't put it together, that is Fun to Be Free, the main theme song from World of Motion. And that's honestly amazing. It's not often that you see many references to old attractions at theme parks. Maybe here and there a logo on a trash can, which they do have as well, but nothing this imprinted on the rides themselves. Guests that were looking to put their sim car designs through even more tests could do so in a multitude of interactive challenges. There were also multiple low-light projection photo ops that placed you in different settings like the moon. I think it was the moon. But the main attraction at the exit was a car dealership. Well, not a full-blown car dealership, but the latest and greatest cars from the Chevrolet fleet were on display, and representatives from the company were more than willing to talk to you about each of the car's specs and even let you sit inside the cars. I do wonder what their success rate of selling one of these cars was, or even if you could just buy a car at Epcot. Wow, I really should have tried that out. This version of Test Track lasted a total of 12 years before closing on June 17th, 2024, with Disney announcing future plans for the attraction at Destination D23 the year prior. The concept art for this updated version of the ride shows that Chevrolet will remain as the ride's sponsor, as well as the removal of the canopy that covered the entryway, and in its place was a round roof that covered the line entrances. The timing of this closure coincided with the construction completion of Future World and the opening of the now named World Celebration Neighborhood, a project that took 5 years to complete and left the center of the park encased in construction walls for a majority of those 5 years. But now, with the extra room for crowds, Disney seemed like it was the right time to close the e-ticket attraction for a lengthy refurbishment. So this begs the question, what is to become of Test Track in this new Test Track 3.0 state? Odds are the track layout will remain the same, minor story beats will be altered, and I assume the ride will be de-Tronified. Since at this point, having a non-official Tron IP attraction at a neighboring park to a park that has an official Tron IP attraction wouldn't make a lot of sense. As we sit here today on the final day of operation of Test Track 2.0, we don't really know what's in store for us next, but what we probably could guess is that it'll be here for the next 13 years or so. Isn't it crazy that not only are we possibly getting a third version of the same exact attraction, but at that point General Motors would be the sponsor of whatever attraction sits in this exact same spot for 54 years running. That is unheard of. And I personally cannot wait. If you enjoy these history videos and are looking for more ways to support, I just launched my Patreon where I'll be sharing exclusive vlogs, which by the way, the first one is out now, as well as behind the scenes content. And if you're looking to have your name featured at the end of the video, like this right here, you could do so by following the link below. Even a 1-month subscription over on Patreon will help support this channel nearly 500 times more than watching an ad on a YouTube video. If you're at all in the position to join, it would help create more videos just like this one. But as always, thank you all for the continuous support, and I will see you guys real soon. Okay, bye.